Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of Meatpacking Unpacked, Community Connected, brought to you by the Meatpacking District. I've got a blazer on again and my hair is still standing up with the right product, so it's a good Saturday in my opinion. My name is Jeffrey LeFrancois, and I'm the Executive Director of the Meatpacking Business Improvement District. Meatpacking Unpacked, our new thought leadership series, will bring you conversations from the Meatpacking District and the city's cultural, political, and business world, our cast of characters, if you will. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates and episodes. Today, I'm joined by the district's member of Congress and Upper West Side resident, Jerry Nadler, a representative of the 10th District, which spans Manhattan's West Side, as well as neighborhoods in Brooklyn. The Congressman was elected in 1992, and he now chairs the Judiciary Committee, which is the second oldest standing committee in Congress. He is an outspoken advocate for civil rights and liberties. He's an infrastructure and transportation guru, and he has used his time in Congress to pass legislation directly informed by the needs of his unique district, some of which we'll talk about today. He's helped secure federal funds for the capital reconstruction of the Meatpacking District, and he helped us cut the ribbon on our new plazas last summer. During the COVID outbreak, the Congressman has been focused on providing support for New Yorkers, small businesses, and our most vulnerable neighbors. He introduced the Pandemic Heroes Compensation Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation which would provide funds for essential workers who get sick with or die from COVID-19. He's held virtual town halls with the Small Business Administration and has worked on the House's newest COVID support economic package, the HEROES Act. Congressman, thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for hosting this.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you and have a conversation. Now, I didn't list all the neighborhoods that you represent, but there are quite a few and they're varied. But when you think of the Meatpacking District, what comes to mind today?
Well, what comes to mind is the transformation of this neighborhood. I remember when it was still meatpacking
Of course.
in the really old days. And now, of course, it became it got revitalized with the arrival of artists and people and creative people. It became a destination district and a residential district. So that's a great change, and it's a vibrant neighborhood. And especially, and I take some pride in creating the High Line, which is an interesting story, because the High Line was an old freight line, as you may know.
Yes.
And it stopped working in 1980. They stopped using it as a freight line in 1980. And the Chelsea Property Owners Association and Conrail wanted to tear it down. And I led the opposition to tearing it down, not because I had any idea of a park later. That came later and wasn't my idea. But I led the opposition back in the 80s to tearing it down because I thought, who knows what's going to happen to the West Side? Maybe residents will want to come here. Not only to the Meatpacking District, but to Western Chelsea, to Hell's Kitchen. And here you have an infrastructure that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to replace. Maybe we'll run a subway line on it. Maybe we'll want to run light rail on it. It's foolish to tear down infrastructure that would cost hundreds of millions to replace for no particular reason. The Chelsea Property Owners Association wanted it torn down because they thought it was an eyesore. It was depressing property values. Now they thank God every day that we kept it
still there.
We actually had to go to court. We went to federal court and we beat Conrail on the question. And it was interesting because a number of the politicians, Borough President David Dinkins, supported us in not tearing it down. Mayor David Dinkins wanted to tear it down, but we won in court. And then a couple of people came up with the idea of it as a park, by which time it was obvious that we weren't going to use it for infrastructure. And I supported that. And it's been a great thing, obviously.
And I think the interesting thing, the High Line was built as a mode of transportation, of infrastructure. And I think a lot of people, New Yorkers in particular, who go on the High Line still use it as such. For me, it's a mode of transit. I use it to walk from one neighborhood to another, actually. So it's been transformed, but it still sort of serves its original purpose.
Yes, it does, in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't realize there was a court battle to actually keep it way back then. I know there was
federal court. It went on for years.
Wow. Okay. See, look at that.
Nobody was thinking of it as a park. Everybody had different motives.
Right. Exactly. And now nobody can think of it but anything but a park today, of course, which is interesting. So when you mentioned the Chelsea property owners and all these associations that exist throughout your district, and everybody's voices are different. So how do you, as a Congress member, which has a whole bunch of constituents, parlay that into a legislative agenda? How do you, work to put stuff forward in Congress that's representative of your district?
Well, I think there are two things you do legislatively. Number one, there's an overview, not just from the district, national issues
Sure.
generally, civil rights, civil liberties, things like that, all kinds of things. And I must say that I've been very lucky because some politicians have crises of conscience. That is to say, they are more liberal, and it turns out the district is more conservative, or vice versa, and they have to balance. I've been very lucky in that I'm very progressive by nature. I want to be very progressive, and my district has turned out to be very progressive, and over the years has not changed. So I've been very lucky. With one or two exceptions, I haven't had any necessity to say, "Oh my God, my conscience says vote this way, and my district says vote the other way." There's been a couple, but not many over the years.
Sure.
So that's very good. But you look at, you talk to all the different people and groups in the district, you see what the interests are, and you craft legislation or budget to meet their needs. For instance, in our district, in particular, we have Broadway, and we have and Broadway. People think of it as nice shows and so forth, and culture, which is important. It's also a lot of jobs. It's an economic engine for the city, and we have to make sure that that it can be sustained. And there are various things you do. So you look at the different areas in the city, in the district, different constituencies. You talk to people, and you see what their needs are, and you try to meet them.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, politically speaking, some say you've become quite famous in the past couple of years, since you certainly took on the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee. But depending on the side of the aisle that one might fall on would determine if your position there is for better or for worse. But besides, I've heard you mention that the
Well,
judiciary,
I think it's for better. I
of
think the
course,
people who think it's for worse are wrong, and they're mainly Republicans.
exactly. The people Judiciary Committee, what does that mean? I've often heard you speak about the fact that you hear the hottest topics of the day: abortion, impeachment, civil rights. Besides those issues, what else comes up before the committee?
Well, it's a surprise. It's a very, very broad committee. Something like 40% of the legislation that was on the House floor in the first 6 months of this session came out of our committee.
Wow.
So we have protecting. Well, right now, hot issues are protecting the rule of law. Trump is endangering that in every way. We're going to have to come up with institutions and with laws, even after he's gone, hopefully in a few months, to make sure that no other president can do this. Things like special counsels, things like ensuring the separation of powers. But beyond that, we have jurisdiction over all criminal law. We have jurisdiction over civil liberties, privacy, surveillance. We'll be taking up on the floor of the House probably this week the renewal or the modification of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. We're making it a little better for civil liberties. We have antitrust law, which hasn't been a subject of a lot of legislation in about 40 years, but we're starting a major investigation and hearings, which we're conducting. I think we have to completely revise our antitrust laws to make it more effective these days. We have copyrights and patents. That includes things like music licensing, which we enacted major legislation 2 years ago, and I'd like to do some more on. We have jurisdiction over immigration, all the immigration laws, voting rights, civil rights, all those. We have a very wide jurisdiction.
Yeah, it touches all corners, it seems. You mentioned intellectual property and that piece of legislation you passed a couple of years ago. I can't remember the name of that piece of legislation, but it was about providing proper compensation for artists. Is that?
Well, that one we haven't passed yet.
But that's a bipartisan bill, though. Don't you have a staunch Republican helping you on that one?
Well, there are some subjects where when you say bipartisan, it's nice, but it doesn't break down along partisan lines at all. So yes, we have Republican support. We also have Republican and Democratic opposition.
Sure.
It has nothing to do. There are not too many issues like that these days, but
That's
music
true.
licensing and artists are. We passed the Music Modernization Act, which was a bipartisan bill, and that was very important. But I think what you're referring to is what I call the ART Act, the American Royalties II Act, which I'm the lead sponsor of, and it requires that resale royalties be paid to visual artists when their work is resold and allows them to benefit when their work increases in value. So, for example, if you copyright a song, you write a song, and you copyright it.
Yep.
Every time it's played on the radio or television or whatever it's played on these days, you get a royalty, you get a residual.
Sure.
And that goes on for 50 years or whatever. I don't know. If, however, you're an artist, you draw a painting or a sculpture, and you're 22 years, and it's a wonderful artist, a wonderful piece of work rather, but you're 22 years old, no one's heard of you yet, and you sell it, fine. So you sell it for whatever you sell it for. 20 years later, you're a recognized artist. It's worth a huge amount of money, but you don't get anything, no matter how often it's used or cited or sold, etc. So it's completely unlike copyrights. So this bill would, my bill, I would say that you get a residual just as if it were a piece of music, so that whenever it is sold or used, you get a percentage. So you're 22 years old, and this piece of art sells for $500, which you get because you sold it. And now you're 42 years old and it sells for $500,000. You don't get a nickel. You ought to. So that's what this bill says. It's interesting because there are only 3 countries in the world which don't have this law: the United States, Iran, and North Korea. We're in great company.
So what's the logic of the opposition on that? Is it that then somebody would lose
Logic
money
is
on
that
the
they don't want to
sale
do it. There's no great logic, and it's the auction houses that are the opposition.
opposed to it?
We will get this through. It may take us a while, but I think we will.
Sure. And I mean, that's interesting. And like I said, I think it gets back to the fact it's the nature of your district. A lot of artists call home, on the west side of Manhattan, in a really prominent way. So this makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, but this is interesting because although we have a lot of artists in the district, and maybe that's one of the reasons I thought of this, it's not something that people are in the district are clamoring for. This is not a district issue in that sense.
Got it.
People don't think about it. But I think it's important as a matter of justice to do it. So we'll try to do it.
Sure. On to the topic that we sort of can't get away from, all the stuff related to COVID. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of local stuff. There's stuff at every level of government going on. And I think we're on the 4th federal relief package, or at least that's what's being the House passed.
Maybe the 5th, actually.
The 5th, okay, there we go. Which is the biggest thus far effort. And I believe it provides the most support for states and municipalities. Why is this different from others, and sort of overall, what is it going to do that the previous pieces of legislation didn't, or what can it do?
Well, the previous pieces of legislation were focused first and foremost on small businesses and on unemployment. This bill greatly improves that, but it also focuses on state and local governments. One of the problems is, state and local governments almost all have balanced budget amendments in their constitutions. I think that's a mistake, but that's neither here nor there. They all have it, almost all of them. I think 44, 45 states. Wow. When you have a recession, what happens is people are out of work, and therefore they're not paying income taxes, and they're not buying things, they're not paying sales taxes, and expenses go up, unemployment insurance, all kinds of expenses. So that's always a problem in a recession. But in this pandemic, it's much, much worse. Because we have the economy practically locked down, there are very few income taxes coming in, very few sales taxes coming in. The states and local governments are hemorrhaging money. And we have to replace that money for them, because otherwise, the only way they can balance their budgets is by laying off people. It's by laying off precisely the people we need: the nurses, the doctors, the the EMTs, the emergency medical people, the cops, the firemen, and cutting back on things like hospitals and medical, exactly the wrong thing to do for the pandemic, also the wrong thing to do for the economy. So this bill provides almost $3 trillion. Well, the overall bill is almost $3 trillion, provides almost $1 trillion for state and local governments. It would give New York City, for New York State, would see in the next 2 years, $35.5 billion of federal money to replace state tax revenues. New York City would see about $30 billion also. The MTA, $4 billion. And this is essential. Now, Senator McConnell, who was a Republican lunatic, as far as I can tell, came out and said the state should go bankrupt. Well, first of all, it's illegal. States can't go bankrupt. But second of all, assuming they could, that would destroy the economy. It would be absolutely horrendous. Especially, never mind the effect on state services, which I just said. So that's the first thing it is. That's the first thing the bill does. It also extends we put into effect a special unemployment program, which this extends. Because when we initially did it, it went only for a limited period of time. I forget exactly how long, but the pandemic is going to last, unfortunately, longer than that. And it does something else. It makes it clear that the aid to small business, we had small business aid, and not just small business. It makes it clear that this applies to nonprofit institutions and to arts institutions. So for example, you take the arts institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Lincoln Center. People don't think of these as small businesses, and not small. But in New York City alone, it's 500,000 jobs. Right. 500,000 jobs in these institutions. So we have to extend it to nonprofits. We also extend the unemployment insurance. In one of the earlier bills, we said, okay, the unemployment insurance, states have various different levels. In some states, like Florida, you can only get unemployment insurance for 12 weeks. And it's very, very small as a replacement ratio of how much you get, of how much you earn. It's very small. So we said, okay, for the duration of the pandemic, we're going to give everybody who's unemployed a $600 a week check in addition to normal unemployment. And in this bill, we extend the time period for that again, and we make clear that goes not just for traditional employees who file a W-2 form, but for gig workers, for all kinds of people who don't file W-2 forms.
Which is a huge part of the economy now.
Absolutely. So we do all those things. We also, for New York, it's not just for New York, but it affects New York in particular. We have aid to renters. We put in $100 billion for aid to renters to pay rent, $75 billion for aid to homeowners. Because, if you're telling people you don't have to, now we had a moratorium on evictions for a few months, but that expires, I think, in June or July. And then people would have to come up with balloon rental payments, which they obviously can't do. So we're extending the moratorium. We're putting in this money for rentals, for rent money for people, and we're extending the time period. And for homeowners, because if someone owns a building, not a huge landlord, but if someone owns a 4 or 5 unit building, and people aren't paying rent, that person still has to pay mortgages, property taxes, etc. So we're extending homeowners assistance also, as well as rental assistance.
So this is a really full circle package in terms of reaching what sounds like a lot deeper into the economy than the previous packages did.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have to reach even deeper. I like the European model, where some countries in Europe are just replacing income without bothering with unemployment insurance. They're just giving money to the employer to say, keep paying your people.
Yeah.
Even if they're stuck at home. It avoids a lot of.
Well, it keeps all those taxes in play, the payroll taxes, the income, everything sort of keeps circling.
That's separate, but it keeps that in play too. But it's a much simpler way of doing things. And one of the problems we're having with this is that the states have not been equipped. States run through, unemployment insurance is administered by states.
Right.
And the volume, 30 million, 35 million people applying for unemployment insurance, the states have been swamped, and they haven't been equipped to get this out the door quickly. They're beginning to catch up now, but it's been a struggle. If you just gave it to employers and said, keep paying your people, didn't go through the state bureaucracy, you could do it faster, you'd be better off.
Right. We got a question in on the YouTube channel on this, Jerry, about congestion pricing. Is there any update to, I think there's a pause on it. There's the Fed, we're waiting on the feds for a sign off. Are you aware of any recent updates on that by chance?
No, I'm not aware of any recent updates on congestion
Okay.
pricing. I think congestion pricing is not going to be relevant while this pandemic is going on, because you don't have the cars, you don't have the traffic. Also, the limiting factor on the congestion pricing, I don't think was the federal government. I think it was just the state has to set up the mechanism and the engineering to do it, and that's going to take a while. But I hope it's just off the table for right now.
Sure.
What is on the table now is obviously the city's program, which is a good program, which I've supported, for open streets.
Yes.
And the open streets, as you know, are available from 8 to 8. This is an opportunity to reclaim our streets for people from cars, at least for a limited while. And we'll see once the emergency is over how much we can carry on.
Yeah.
But this is a very good thing that we're doing now. And you know, there are streets in the Meatpacking District where this is being done.
Yes, we were happy to be among, I put the first or second round, and thank you for the support on that. We're seeing it being utilized and successful as more restaurants are opening for takeout and delivery. There seems to be a new demand, and that's I think that's playing a role in that. So it's figuring out how we can sort of balance the public space accordingly.
Right.
What else do you think are going to be the city's biggest challenges, as the struggle around this pandemic is all about space and people feeling safe? And do you have any thoughts on what a post-pandemic New York City can do, what we will do, what it will look like?
There are really two things. First, people should be very patient. I'm very worried about governors and mayors, not New York in particular, but not New York, opening up too early. We're seeing the pandemic come back. We're seeing it spike in area, not in New York, because we flattened the curve. But if we start opening up too soon, it'll come back here too.
Yeah.
I think we're in we're going to have to be very careful until we get an effective vaccine or a cure, which, God willing, will be in a year, but maybe not. Who knows? Maybe faster. I don't know. But I think the major change in New York, it's hard to say what's going to be, but when you have a shock to the economy this way, there are going to be certain results, some foreseeable, some not. One thing I think is foreseeable is that, and this is going to be a challenge to New York, because New York is a very dense city. Mm-hmm. We derive a lot of the revenues from property taxes, all kinds of, not just government revenues from property taxes, but the whole economy is built around a dense urban core of work in Manhattan especially. And I think that there's a very good possibility that after the pandemic is over, a lot of that isn't going to come back. Companies having discovered that they can work, maybe less efficiently to some extent with people working at home. I think a lot of companies are probably going to say, well, we don't need as much space. We can have 20%, 40% of our people working from home, so we don't have to pay that rent. So I think that the city, a lot of the office buildings in New York may have occupancy problems. And eventually the city may be less dense, which may be a good or bad thing. I don't know long term, but it's going to be a wrenching economic adjustment. And there'll be a lot of other economic changes which we can't foresee now.
Right.
And behavioral changes. I mean, this kind of a shock is going to leave a lot of results that really are unforeseeable.
Well, and speaking of behavioral changes, the House passed a rule change recently regarding remote voting.
Yes.
The New York State legislature had done that. And at the federal level, each chamber can change its own rules, right?
Yes, the Constitution specifically says that. Although Senator McConnell the other day, I saw in the newspaper, said that he thought it was unconstitutional. The Senate wouldn't take up any legislation passed by the House. Well, he won't be able
Because
to
of the
maintain it.
remote voting?
Yes, because of the remote voting.
Wow. I mean, are you here? Has there been a remote vote yet, or just the vote was taken to change the rule?
No, the vote was taken to change the rules. We'll probably do the first remote voting on Thursday of this week,
Okay.
this coming week.
And do you anticipate like are the Republicans just not going to show up?
No, I think they will show up. That's not the question. The Republicans, for reasons of being he-men or supporting the president or something,
Right.
they are opposed to. Half of them don't wear masks, even on the House floor. They're opposed to social distancing. I mean, it makes no rational sense.
Right.
I mean, you should have heard the debate over the remote voting. We're here to do the American people's business. We've done it for 230 years, and we shouldn't stop it. And we're supposed to assemble. The Constitution says assemble. Nonsense. I mean, and I don't understand I almost said theology. It's not ideology.
It's a new sense of theology.
Yeah, but no, they'll be there, and a lot of them will not observe. I mean, we will. One of the things we did about remote voting is we didn't go the whole way. We provided that committees can meet and have hearings. The Republicans objected to our having hearings, even without any remotely, even without any legislation being considered. So we had democratic forums with guests instead of witnesses. It's essentially the same thing, but no Republicans there. Starting next week, we'll be able to hold official hearings, and we'll be able to report out bills, to do markups, to amend and report bills to the floor remotely.
Formal business.
In committees. And we had a run through yesterday because there's some technological, we got to run through it. But we didn't provide for complete remote voting. What we provided for, which I think we should, but what we provided for was proxy voting. That is to say, members can come to the chamber and can have as many as 10 proxies. So, but the proxy would have to be an instructed proxy, not vote the way you think I would. On this amendment, vote this way, on that amendment, vote that way. It's very specific. And so a member could carry, so some members from the local area presumably will go there and be able to vote by proxy. Now, the rule also provides that the speaker, and this is only during the emergency. Once the emergency goes away, then it won't provide anymore. Sure. And when the technology is worked out, they're worried about security. I'm not clear exactly what security they're worried about. When this technology is worked out, then we'll have complete remote voting on the floor.
Sure. Well, I want to move a little bit away from this technical business stuff and bring you into my 5 rapid fire questions to unpack a little bit more about Jerry Nadler, the person.
Okay.
So short and sweet, but I think a little fun. So we'll start with your preference for transportation around the city, subway or bus?
Subway.
Egg and cheese on a roll or egg and cheese on a bagel?
Well, I don't like egg and cheese, but I like bagels.
Okay, what kind of bagel?
Everything bagel.
Okay, gotcha. Jazz or classical music?
Neither really. What I like are folk music and cantorial music.
Okay, gotcha. FDR or JFK?
FDR.
Why?
FDR was much more fundamental. I mean, he really saved the country, and he was much more fundamental in taking on the big interests and being willing to use government power to help people. And I think we have to do that again.
Gotcha. And the final one, the movies or the theater?
I prefer the movies. My wife prefers the theater.
So household split, look at that. Well, with that, thank you, Congressman Nadler, for joining us today and unpacking a bit of history, government, politics, the district, and a little bit of you. We really appreciate you being here. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Next week,
stay safe.
Thank you, you too. And next week, folks, you can tune in again. We're having a conversation with New York City Small Business Services Commissioner John L. Doris. Same time, 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned to hear more from the Meatpacking District and the city's cast of characters across our cultural, political, and business spectrum. Have a safe and fun Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you again, Congressman.